In this video, I'm going to tell you about how to stay motivated when your army has been completely destroyed, or maybe just nerfed. Recently, I did a video about change in wargaming and what to do about it, and how to not worry about it too much and all that kind of stuff. Pachow. And from the comments kind of related to that, this other question came along talking about, well, what should I do when the army that I love, that I have been involved in building for a certain amount of time, maybe it's only a short time, and in some situations, maybe it's been something that you've been doing for a long time, and that army gets nerfed real hard by the rules makers, whether it's actually nerfed in some fashion or just sort of perceived to be nerfed, and maybe we'll be able to get back to that in a little bit. Or what happens if it just gets completely destroyed or discontinued, or, you know, kind of Tomb Kings, if you follow with Warhammer Fantasy / Age of Sigmar. And I thought it was an interesting concept, and it's something that I've never necessarily had to worry about particularly, but I can see where it would be problematic, and I think I've got a couple of solutions, I hope. So what does it mean to be nerfed? You've probably heard that term before, but you might not understand what it means. I get a general idea of what it means, and I believe the etymology. Entomology? No, that's bugs or something. Etymology? I think it's etymology. Of the word, to be nerfed is as if you were turned into Nerf. So if I was a baseball bat and I could really do some work, if you then turned me into a Nerf baseball bat, I would not be able to crush skulls as easily. I mean, you probably could, but it would take a lot more work. So let's not do. Anyway, my point is that when something gets nerfed, it becomes less powerful, is the concept, in case you don't know. So this happens in rules changes quite frequently when games go from one edition to the next edition, or when a codex or army book comes out that changes just a specific army. Things happen. There's two sides to this coin. You have something called, in many situations, power creep. In Warhammer 40,000 and in Age of Sigmar, it's frequently referred to as codex creep. As new codexes come out, as the years go by, they keep ramping up the power, because if they come out with a new codex for an already existing army, or maybe even a completely new army, but it's not that powerful, then the competitive players would be like, well, why would I bother? I have this stuff over here, which is easier to win with in more situations than this thing, which is reasonable. And you don't want reasonable, you know, when you're trying to play competitively. You want the real skull crusher. So in many situations, codex creep means we come out with a new codex or something like that, or we redo a codex, a new edition, and we make it tougher than other ones, and then people are like, oh, well, now I want that one because that'll help me win. And so, you know, there's that. It sometimes does happen, though, that it goes the other way, and it's generally, in many situations, not so much that the codex comes out and gets worse, although sometimes it does seem to do that. More often than not, it's usually the codex comes out, it is surprisingly good, more so than potentially the designers thought, and then people jump on that because they find the loophole. They're like, yes, this will help me win. And then an FAQ comes out and then says, actually, we're going to fix this and this and this because that's just not. And then now you have all this stuff that you bought, and it's not quite as powerful as it was before. And that happens, you know, and so you have to take a look at what's going to go on. If you're playing competitively, you've got a choice to make. One of two things. You either dump this particular army, maybe either throw it, you know, in a tub in your basement or in your closet, or throw it on eBay or sell it to a friend or whatever. If you're going to save it, maybe you're hoping that it'll get more powerful later on. I don't know. Or you're a hoarder, but you know, that's fine. The other option is to sell it. So very frequently when a new FAQ comes out, when a new codex comes out, very frequently, if you hear the gnashing of teeth and the rending of garments on the internet, your next step, if you're interested in those models, is to go onto eBay, because they will flood eBay with that stuff. And, you know, that's, again, for the competitive folks who are playing in tournaments and want to win, that's kind of a common thing. And, you know, so that's fine. But if you're not competitive, well, what kind of other options do you have? Honestly, if you're not a competitive player, then generally you probably don't care that much, really. If you're not super interested in going out there and winning tournaments, then if your army gets slightly less powerful than it was before, nerfed, or even maybe even more than nerf, maybe down to, I don't know, like whipped cream. If you ever make a baseball bat out of a whipped cream, it wouldn't, nothing, whatever. If that happens, you can generally look at it and go, okay, well, that's fine. So I'm not going to win as much. If you're not a competitive player, is the game still fun for you to play with those models at all? If it's not, because they've really, really made it so that they're absolutely impossible to win with, and frequently that's not actually the case. But like I said, I'm going to try to get to that. In those situations, you have to make that decision yourself. Maybe you take those models and you use them for a completely different game. I mentioned the Tomb Kings before. Tomb Kings were an undead army in Warhammer Fantasy. Age of Sigmar came along, and they're very, very Egyptian-based, these Tomb Kings. I mean, the tomb, it makes sense. Basically, they kind of slowly got phased out. Now, you can still use those models in Age of Sigmar. They are not obviously top tier because they haven't been making new books for them or new war scrolls or anything along those lines. They put out the war scrolls when the game first came out, and then you can't buy those models new anymore because they don't really sell them. They're not producing them. They're not producing any new stuff for Tomb Kings or anything like that. Tomb Kings are technically kind of not an army anymore, but they're still playable from what I've seen, and so that's fine. But they're also skeletons, and who doesn't like skeletons? We all have one. So, I mean, I've taken Tomb Kings. I actually bought Tomb Kings after Age of Sigmar came out so that I could use them, and a lot of people were dumping them on the internet, so I could use them in other games. And I've used them as, I just made sure that they weren't painted that kind of gold and blue sort of look that normally the Egyptian kind of Tomb Kings look like. And I just used them as regular skeleton warriors in my normal undead army for Age of Sigmar. I can also then use them in all kinds of other kind of fantasy skirmish games. There's a lot of models out there, especially if it's like, well, I mean, really, any game, you can usually figure out a way to get this model into that game. If it is, I don't know, like an elf with obviously very, very pointed ears and a bow and arrow and little tights and the whole deal, probably not going to work in a hard sci-fi game. I get that. You can use any model you want, but you're probably going to look at it and go, well, that's kind of weird. But in a lot of other situations, if it's a fantasy game that's styled like this, but you've got models that are fantasy, but they're styled slightly different, you can still probably use them. So that's one thing to look at. If you're not a competitive player and you have this massive change to the game, you can use these models probably in either other games or just in your own kind of pickup games of other types of random, miniatures agnostic style fantasy games. And sci-fi, basically kind of the same. Look for some fun miniatures agnostic models and then go from there. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that maybe you weren't nerfed as hard as you thought. I have found over the years that a lot of the again, rending of garments and gnashing of teeth that comes out on the internet whenever a change to anything in wargaming happens ever, very frequently that's blown out of proportion. It is very rare that a company will make a change to an army to make it absolutely useless. But yet you'll see useless, garbage, all these kinds of words like that all over the internet quite frequently after a big change. Now, many times these are people who are reacting to a exploit, for lack of a better term, or maybe just something that wasn't play tested as well as it should have been, and it allowed them to have very, very, very powerful for the points units in their game and be very OP, I think is the term that the kids use. And when that then gets adjusted, then again, sadness and crying. And so, the thing that you can also do to look at if you're looking at your army and it's been destroyed by making it more reasonably point leveled and whatnot, maybe just learn to play it a little better, or maybe just decide that it's not going to be this glass hammer where I find this one trick that works awesome and I put all my units into doing that one thing and I win 95% of my games because this is overpowered, and then when we fix that, now I can't win games anymore because all of my emphasis is in this one trick, right? Instead of becoming a one-trick pony, if you want to keep the army and you want to get a little bit more useful and have a better chance of winning, take a look at actually balancing your army. Most games, most tabletop war games are generally designed to try to make it so that you build a balanced army. If you build an army that only does this one thing, then those are the only models that are ever going to get sold. So if just from an economic standpoint, they want to make it so that you try to have a smattering of all kinds of models that they sell. If they only sell this one model, then they've got shelves full of this other thing over here because nobody wants it. So very frequently, and I'm not going to tell you that it's not the case, but very frequently, there will be points changes, rules changes, whatever, that take this model that wasn't selling because nobody wanted it, because it had garbage rules, and then in the next edition, now it's pretty awesome again. And then therefore, people start buying it. And so, this is not imaginary. This is a thing that does actually happen. But just because they've made changes to your rule set for your particular army, your codex, your army book, your whatever, your system calls it, don't believe the hype and believe that, well, now I have to throw it all away because it's been destroyed. Keep playing with it. And again, like I said, maybe try some balance and see what happens and then go from there. So if your army has been actually completely phased out for whatever reason for the particular game system that you play, and if you've got a game system that you're into, put in the comments below. Tell me the thing that got phased out, because there's not going to be a ton of them. I can think of, like I said, Tomb Kings. I can think of, I guess, Bretonians and such like that. There's probably other games. I know that there were some things in Malifaux that's sort of in between, like first and second, or second and third. There were some sort of shenanigans that went on a little bit there. But in general, most times these companies don't want to tell you, oh, hey, those models you bought, they're garbage now, because they know that you will get very angry at them and not buy any more of their models. Generally, like when Age of Sigmar came out and everybody was up in arms, they said, look, every model we've ever made for fantasy is going to have a war scroll. And they were right. Now, admittedly, some of those models never got an updated war scroll past that first one back in 2015 or whatever, but still, you can still technically play with them. Are they competitive? Probably not, but you can still play with them. So a lot of times when people talk about nerfs and total, like, absolute, like, we don't, it's been destroyed, that's a lot of times hyperbole on the internet. So take that, first of all, with a grain of salt. Then take a look at your current army build. Try to figure out, am I putting too much effort into this one trick that was really cool and now they've kind of nerfed? Or is there something else going on? And then maybe rebalance and start playing. And if worse comes to worse and you just can't be motivated to even bother with this army anymore, then either you can squirrel it away someplace for maybe a rainy day down the road when all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, I found this other game that can work with these guys perfectly, and that's great. And then you don't have to buy new models because you've already got them. That's generally what I do. Or you can throw them on eBay. It's up to you.